my background, Iceland. I was a journalist for a good many years. I'm a historian, but I was mainly involved in trade union work. I was the leader of the public service unions in Iceland for 20 years or so before I entered politics. Now, Iceland is a small country and there are very few of us. In fact, it is a tiny society. We are about 330,000, although we never think of ourselves as being tiny. I think we are never quite sure if we are 350,000 or 350 millions, and that's probably part of our problem. Now, even if we are small, we managed to build a strong welfare society in Iceland based on full employment for most of the time and social cohesion, and this is a key word. From the Second World War, unemployment in Iceland was seldom more than 1 or 2%, with few exceptions in the late 60s when we lost the herring. Then we had temporary unemployment, and then in the early 90s, but not real unemployment till after the economic crash, which occurred in Iceland in 2008, and this is what I'm going to tell you a little bit about. Now, the world may be governed by interests, but ideas also play a big part. And we had our share of the wave of neoliberalism that swept Europe and America in the late, or from the late 1970s till the 90s, and till this day, in fact. And as a journalist, I interview them all, Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, and we had Buchanan, and all those neoliberalists who came to Iceland to tell us how to prepare and harvest our garden. Now, we had the harvest on our menu first and then on our tables, and the harvest was very much the same in Iceland as elsewhere: deregulation and privatization, which had all kinds of wrappings, PFIs, public-private partnership, outsourcing, but the content was always the same: marketization, emphasis on marketization. And gradually, I would state, a unwritten social contract was broken up. I come from a family where my mother is left-leaning, but my father was right-leaning. I myself stand furthest to the left in Icelandic politics. I was, or have, however, been saying very much the same things as my right-leaning father was saying in the 1950s and 1960s. He advocated market solutions in the market, but he would never have dreamt of introducing the notion of private gain or profit into the schools or the healthcare system. He was director of education in Reykjavik for a long time. But even if I say that the social contract was gradually being broken up or eroded, we still had a strong system or tradition of social dialogue in Iceland. We had a tripartite system of social discourse between government, trade unions, and business. This was still so when the banks crashed in 2008, and it was a real crash. The banks had been privatized. They had started to invest very heavily throughout the world, very much in Europe, but in many parts of the world. And they had long outgrown their social base. They were 11 times the size of our gross national product, 11 times when they crashed. And this came very suddenly. There had been predictions that there was something very, very wrong going on, but it came as a surprise nevertheless. And the British government helped along. They took down one of the Icelandic banks operating in Britain, Landsbanki, and because they had no recourse to law, they classified Iceland as a terrorist state. Along with Al-Qaeda and North Korea, we were advertised throughout the world as terrorists. We are a member of NATO, remember. But this was done. And we had the whole international community against us. We got a visitor to Iceland. The IMF had representatives for 3 years in Iceland. And in fact, we had relatively good cooperation with them. But the way we got out of the crisis was manifold. Now, there was an emergency law which was immediately introduced, introducing immediate currency controls, and then there were created new banks, and deposits from the old banks were transferred to them. And everything was done to try to shield the real economy from the fallen economy so that we would not socialize all our debts. This did not mean we didn't have to do something drastic, because all economic entities were, of course, greatly reduced. Revenues of state, revenues of municipalities, of business, and of ordinary people. Because one of the things that happened in the aftermath of the fall of the banks, 9/10 of the banking system fell, was that the crown, our currency, was devalued 50%. 50%. This meant that the buying power of the entire nation was reduced. Now, having a small currency is a blessing and a curse. The curse, of course, was that we were easy prey to speculators on the currency markets. But the blessing was that when we went through this crisis, we reduced buying power of all, everybody. There is another way of doing it, that is with heavy or great unemployment. That reduces the buying power of some, not of all. And this, of course, meant that the cost of Icelandic labor was greatly reduced, which helped us again on the international market selling our products. Unemployment, nevertheless, went up to 10% when it was worse. It's now 3.8%, and things are getting gradually better. But what we had to do, and I was in government at the time. We came into power in 2009, and we were thrown out at the end of 2013. And sorry, that's right. Yes, and we lowered taxes on low-income groups. We higher taxes on high-income groups, but we also cut down. We cut operating costs. Operating costs in the state, 23%. That means hospitals. That means schools. That means everything. In my ministry, in the Ministry of Interior, we cut 25%, real terms. It's a lot. And here I come to the crux of my argument, which has to do with social justice and equality in society. Because during this time there was no unrest, no strikes, nothing. Everybody accepted that something drastic must be done. And I'll tell you a little story to conclude with. I remember I was in the parliament at the beginning of 2009. And in our little peaceful society, there had been big demonstrations, thousands of people in the square in front of the parliament every day, every night. They were beating drums, they were throwing stones at the parliament, eggs and stones, and the police were standing there with their shields and tear gas. This was unheard of in Iceland, unheard of. But this was actually happening, and people were speculating if the House of Parliament would be invaded. And then one night, about 10 o'clock, I remember I was having a television interview, and I can remember how the microphone was shaking in the hand of the interviewer. We could hear eggs hitting the windows and then stones. The night before, the police had been using tear gas. And after the interview, we went to the window, and there was a policeman standing by me, and we looked out, and we saw the police ready, and the stones were getting bigger, very aggressive crowds. And then suddenly, a group of people took themselves from the crowd and formed a human wall of defense in front of the police to defend them and to defend Parliament. And then the policeman put his arm around my shoulder, and he said, "Thank God, we are back home. We are back home in Iceland." This is how we got out of the crisis. And we have a saying in Iceland that if you get into rough seas, what you do is you take to the oars together, all together. But there is a precondition. You must be on the same boat. You must be on the same boat. And this was our mission in government. We were to equalize society, make it more just, get people on the same boat. And I think that was the reason we are now gradually getting out of the crisis. So I think when we talk about business and how to succeed in business, we must never forget the social dimension, social justice. Thank you very much.